Careful now. Don't rush past this moment. This is where the room goes quiet and the lie finally stops breathing. You saw it happen. Everyone did. The golden boy, polished, praised, protected, started to crack right in front of them, and the whole crowd froze like a statue caught mid-prayer. They expected gasps. They expected panic. They expected you to look away, to soften, to hesitate. But you didn't even blink. And that's the part that still keeps them up at night. Because what kind of person watches the chosen one fall apart and doesn't flinch? Not a monster, not a hero, something far more dangerous, something evolved. See, they built him to be admired. They wrapped him in applause, patted his mistakes, rewrote history to keep him shining. He was their proof that the system worked, that the script was real, that obedience gets rewarded and pain gets edited out of the final cut. He was their angel, clean hands, clean record, clean story. And then gravity remembered his name. You felt it before it happened. You always do. The microfractures in his voice, the way the confidence started sounding rehearsed, the way his smile lingered a second too long, like it needed permission to exist. You clocked it quietly, without celebration, without pity. Because you know collapse isn't tragic, it's diagnostic. And when it finally happened, when the mask slipped and the room went cold, everyone looked at you. Not because you caused it, but because you didn't react. That's what terrified them. They're used to emotional obedience. They're used to people performing sympathy on cue, outrage on command, shock like a reflex. They wanted tears, whispers, moral theater. You gave them nothing, just stillness, just that calm, unnerving silence that says, I've seen this before, and I survived worse. They couldn't read you. And when they can't read you, they can't control you. You didn't cheer. You didn't judge. You didn't rush in to play savior or executioner. You just stood there, watching the illusion die with surgical calm. That's when it hit them. This wasn't about him collapsing. This was about you not needing him to stay standing. That's power they can't frame as kindness or cruelty. It exists outside their vocabulary. They want saints who bleed on schedule. They want psychopaths they can point at and label. But you live in the space between. The place where an angel learns how to watch without mercy and a demon learns restraint. You've integrated both. That's why your calm looks so violent to them. Because you've already collapsed before. You remember it, even if you don't talk about it. The version of you they celebrated once, or ignored, or used. The version that broke quietly while everyone else kept moving. No audience, no sympathy, no golden boy treatment. You learned early that survival doesn't come from being loved. It comes from being accurate. Accurate about people, accurate about patterns, accurate about how fast admiration turns into hunger when the fall starts. So when his world caved in, you didn't flinch. Not because you're cold, but because you've already done the math. You know what's underneath the polish. You know how fast the crowd switches scripts. You know how fragile crowns are when they're built out of applause. They didn't just watch him fall. They watched you refuse to participate in the ritual. No kneeling, no clapping, no pretending this was shocking. Just that look in your eyes. The one that says, this is what happens when the spotlight lies. That look rewrote the room. Now they're replaying it in their heads, wondering what you know, wondering what you've seen, wondering how many collapses you've already outlived to stand there that steady. They're asking themselves a question they never wanted to ask. If he was the golden boy, what the hell are you? You're the one who doesn't need the title. You're the one who doesn't need protection. You're the one who learned to evolve instead of perform. While they were investing in image, You were investing in durability. While they were polishing his mask, life was sharpening you. And here's the part they really can't handle. You didn't feel relief when he fell. You felt confirmation. Confirmation that nothing handed to someone survives pressure. Confirmation that pain is the great equalizer. Confirmation that the system always eats its favorites eventually. And confirmation that you're built for aftermath, not applause. They think your silence was mercy or cruelty or indifference. It was none of that. It was mastery. Because when you've walked through your own collapse, when you've watched your own illusions burn, you stop being impressed by other people's shine. You stop reacting. You start observing. And observation is where real power lives. Now the room feels different when you walk into it. They're quieter, more careful. They don't know whether you're the warning or the consequence. They just know you didn't flinch when the golden boy shattered, and that means you're not afraid of endings. You're built from them. So let them whisper, let them speculate, let them try to decide whether you're ruthless or enlightened. You don't need to correct them. You don't need to explain yourself. You already said everything with your stillness. You watched their favorite fall apart, and you stood there unmoved. Not because you lack empathy, but because you've transcended illusion, and now they understand something they can't unsee. You're not here to be crowned. You're here to survive what crowns can't. And here's what they still don't understand. Your stillness wasn't passive. It was loaded. It was the quiet of someone who's already mapped every exit while everyone else was memorizing the decor. When he fell, the room didn't just lose a symbol, it lost a compass. They had oriented themselves around him, his approval, his shine, his proximity to favor. When gravity finally collected its debt, they panicked because they realized they never learned how to stand without something golden to orbit. You did. That's why your calm felt obscene to them, almost offensive, like you broke an unspoken rule. You were supposed to be shaken. You were supposed to feel small, witnessing the collapse of someone placed above you. Instead, you looked familiar with it, like collapse was a language you'd already learned fluently. They don't know how many nights trained you for that moment, how many times you watched your own plans dissolve, how many versions of yourself you buried without ceremony. They don't know how many times you had to keep moving while everything you believed in went silent. You weren't raised by applause. You were forged by absence. So when the golden boy cracked, you didn't see tragedy. You saw structure failing under weight it was never meant to carry. And that's the difference. They believed in symbols. You believe in systems. They believed in appearances. You believe in pressure tests. They believed he was special because the room said so. You knew nothing is special until it survives being stripped naked. That's why your eyes didn't widen. That's why your breathing didn't change. That's why you didn't rush in to save or destroy. You were watching the truth surface, and truth doesn't require theatrics. What really scared them wasn't your lack of reaction. It was your timing. You didn't step forward when he was strong. You didn't step back when he was weak. You stayed exactly where you were, centered, unmoved. Like the collapse didn't change your position in the slightest. That's when it hit them. You weren't competing with him. You were never even playing the same game. While he was busy maintaining a role, you were building internal leverage. While he was managing perception, you were mastering endurance. While he was protected by the system, you were learning how to operate without one. That's why when the protection vanished, so did he. And you didn't feel vindicated. You felt unsurprised. Because you know something they don't like admitting out loud. collapse isn't random. It's scheduled. It's the bill coming due for every shortcut, every unearned pedestal, every truth postponed. And when it arrives, it doesn't care how loved you were 5 minutes ago. You've lived long enough in the dark to know that. That's why your calm wasn't cruel. It was informed. You weren't enjoying his fall. You were recognizing a pattern. The same one that humbles idols, rewrites hierarchies, and exposes how fragile borrowed power really is. Now they're reevaluating you, quietly, nervously. They're replaying the moment in their heads, frame by frame. The way you didn't lean in, the way you didn't lean away, the way your presence didn't change, even as the atmosphere collapsed around him. They're wondering what kind of pressure it takes to create someone who doesn't react to implosions. They don't know whether you're dangerous because you're ruthless or because you're free. And the truth is, it's both. You've learned how to hold compassion without weakness, how to observe without attachment, how to let things end without needing to be the reason. That's a level of psychological autonomy most people never touch. They're too busy chasing approval to notice how enslaved it makes them. You're not enslaved to outcome. That's why outcomes don't own you. And now the room feels unstable in your presence. Conversations stall when you enter. People measure their words. They sense, without being able to explain it, that you're not impressed by hierarchy, that you don't flinch at failure, that you don't worship shine. You're built for aftermath. You're built for the moment after applause fades, after protection is withdrawn, after the crowd looks around and realizes the rules just changed. That's why your silence spoke louder than any reaction ever could. You didn't celebrate his collapse. You outgrew the need to. And here's the layer beneath that, the one they won't admit even to themselves. When you didn't flinch, something inside them shifted position, not emotionally, structurally. Like a load-bearing belief cracked. Because if the golden boy can fall, and you can remain steady, then the hierarchy they trusted isn't real. It's just a stage prop. And stages collapse the moment the audience stops believing. They felt that belief drain out of the room in real time. Up until that moment, they told themselves a comforting story. That success protects you. That being chosen insulates you. That being visible keeps you safe. He was living proof of that myth. Until he wasn't. And the myth didn't just fail. It evaporated. You saw that evaporation. You recognized it instantly. That's why your posture didn't change. You weren't witnessing a man fall. You were witnessing a lie die, and lies always scream on the way out. They expected you to react because reaction confirms the lie. Shock says, this wasn't supposed to happen. Sympathy says, this shouldn't have happened. Outrage says, someone broke the rules. You gave them none of that. You gave them acceptance. And acceptance is lethal to illusions, because acceptance says, this was inevitable. That's why they don't know how to place you now. You're not above them. You're not below them. You're outside the grid entirely, and systems hate anything they can't rank. They've started watching you differently, not openly, not dramatically, quiet surveillance, subtle recalibration. They're tracking your reactions, or rather your refusal to provide them. They're trying to reverse engineer you from the outside, but they can't see the internal work that got you here. They can't see the nights you didn't break publicly. They can't see the losses you metabolized in private. They can't see the identities you shed without applause. They only see the result, someone who doesn't panic when gravity does its job. And that scares them more than rage ever could. Rage is predictable. Rage can be provoked, redirected, framed. Calm can't. Calm means you're not hooked. Calm means you're not chasing their approval or fearing their rejection. Calm means you already paid the price. Most people spend their whole lives avoiding. You paid it early. You learned what it feels like to stand with nothing backing you. No protection, no narrative, no safety net. Just your own nervous system learning how to regulate under pressure. That rewired you. That's why collapse doesn't feel catastrophic anymore. It feels familiar. They don't know that when you watched him fall, a part of you recognized the moment. Not because you wished it on him, but because you've stood in that exact free fall before. You know the sound reality makes when the bottom drops out. You know the silence that follows when the crowd doesn't know whether to clap or run. You've lived there. That's why you didn't feel superior. You felt grounded. You didn't feel powerful. You felt aligned. There's a difference. Superiority needs comparison. Alignment doesn't. Alignment is knowing who you are when the lights go out. And now the lights flickered for everyone to see. They're scrambling to assign meaning to your stillness. Some of them call it cold. Some call it heartless. Some call it dangerous. A few, very few, recognize it for what it actually is: integration. You're not split anymore. Not saint pretending to be soft. Not monster pretending to be controlled. You've fused both sides into something coherent. You can feel empathy without being consumed by it. You can witness destruction without needing to orchestrate it. You can stand near chaos without becoming chaotic. That's mastery. And mastery is invisible until it's contrasted with collapse. The Golden Boy was optimized for praise. You were optimized for reality. That's why when the environment turned hostile, only one of you stayed upright. Not because you're better, but because you're built differently. They're starting to sense that difference now. It's subtle, but it's spreading. The way conversations hesitate when you're nearby. The way people test your reactions with small provocations, just to see if you'll bite. The way authority figures suddenly over-explain themselves around you, like they're trying to preempt a judgment you never voiced. They're uneasy because you don't perform submission or dominance. You don't need to. Your nervous system isn't outsourced to the room. And here's the final truth they'll never say out loud. When you didn't flinch, they realized you'd already survived something worse than his fall. They don't know what it was. They just know it carved you into someone who doesn't worship stability, because you learned how to be stable without it. That's why you don't chase golden status. You know it's fragile. You know it's conditional. You know it collapses the moment it's tested. You don't need to be protected by the system. You already learned how to outlast it, so let them keep replaying the moment. Let them keep wondering what you're capable of. You don't need to announce anything. Your silence already did the damage. They watched their Golden Boy collapse, and they watched you remain unmoved. That contrast rewired the room forever. And that's where it ends, quietly, without fireworks, without explanation, because the real shift already happened. They don't talk about him anymore, not the way they used to. His name doesn't carry the same weight. The shine faded faster than anyone expected. And every time they remember how fast it happened, they remember you standing there, steady, unmoved. They learned something in that moment they can't unlearn. Collapse doesn't announce itself, and strength doesn't need permission. They learned that admiration is fragile, but composure is permanent. They learned that the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one who causes the fall. It's the one who understands it and keeps breathing normally. That's you. You didn't win by reacting. You didn't dominate by attacking. You didn't rise by stepping on anyone. You transcended by staying still while the illusion died, and now they see it, too late to undo it. You're not impressed by crowns. You're not shaken by endings. You're not afraid of gravity. They watched their golden boy collapse, and what they really witnessed was this: you were already built for what comes after. And after that realization settles in, after the noise dies and the room pretends to move on, something else starts happening beneath the surface, something slow, something irreversible. They begin adjusting around you, not consciously, instinctively. People who once spoke freely now choose their words more carefully, not because you threatened them, but because your presence reminds them that performance has an expiration date. They feel exposed around you, like their internal posture is being audited without consent. You don't interrogate them. You don't challenge them. You don't even look at them differently. And that's the worst part, because you're not trying to win their respect. You already know how fragile respect is when it's handed out by crowds. They used to believe collapse was loud, public, humiliating, something that happens to people. Now they understand it's quieter than that. It happens internally first. It happens when belief drains out faster than identity can adjust. It happens when the story you relied on stops working. That's what they watched in him, and that's what they now sense in themselves. Because your calm didn't just expose his weakness, it exposed everyone's dependency on illusion. The room had relied on the golden boy to carry a fantasy, that success equals immunity, that approval equals safety, that being liked equals being untouchable. You shattered that fantasy without lifting a finger. And here's the part no one dares say. Your restraint was more threatening than violence ever could be. Violence would have given them a villain. Emotion would have given them a narrative. Your neutrality gave them nothing to grab onto, just a mirror. And mirrors make people uncomfortable when they're not ready to see themselves. They wonder if you felt something when he fell. They tell themselves you must have. Everyone does. But what they can't accept is that you've learned how to feel without reacting, how to acknowledge without attaching, how to witness without absorbing. That's not coldness. That's emotional sovereignty. You don't outsource your nervous system to chaos anymore. You don't let the room decide how you breathe. You don't let other people's rises or collapses dictate your internal temperature. That independence reads as arrogance to those who still live reactively. But it isn't arrogance, it's graduation. You graduated from needing external stability to feel grounded, from needing comparison to feel real, from needing drama to feel alive. You've already walked through the part of life that strips all of that away. And you didn't disappear, you adapted. That's why when they saw the golden boy collapse, they didn't just lose faith in him. They lost faith in the idea that protection lasts forever. They lost faith in the script that promised safety in exchange for compliance. And standing right there was proof that another way exists. You, not shiny, not worshipped, not insulated, but unshaken. They don't know what to do with that kind of presence. You're not trying to climb. You're not trying to burn anything down. You're just there, fully intact, fully conscious, fully capable of watching things end without needing to interfere. That's a level of internal power most people never touch, because it requires surviving the exact thing they spend their lives avoiding. You didn't flinch because you've already made peace with loss. You didn't react because you no longer confuse intensity with importance. You didn't celebrate because you don't need someone else's fall to validate your standing. And now, The hierarchy feels thinner, more fragile, like it could tear if someone leaned on it too hard. They're careful now, careful with you, careful with each other, careful with the stories they tell themselves about who's untouchable. Because somewhere in the back of their minds, a new truth has lodged itself, and it won't leave. If the golden boy can collapse, and you can remain centered, then real strength doesn't look like perfection. It looks like someone who has already survived the worst moment of their life and didn't need to announce it. That's why you don't need the spotlight. That's why endings don't scare you. That's why you stand differently now. They watched their golden boy collapse. But what haunts them is this. You were never depending on him staying upright in the first place. You were already built for whatever comes next.